Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. Don't be an asshole or stop being an asshole. Well, if you don't know what that means, well, that's the reason why we have this next guest on. He is the best-selling author and highly sought-after keynote speaker who has presented for Meta, aka Facebook, Nike, Home Depot, Verizon, and many other Fortune 100 companies. He also has two amazing top-selling books, The Millennial Whisperer and Save Your Ass. Please welcome my next guest, the one and only Chris Tuff. How you doing today, Chris?
Christian, I'm so excited to be here. And I have to say that I have to almost caveat myself with an intro like that. I'm not a D-bag, okay? Like, it was funny. Someone introduced me onto a call yesterday. I'm like, I promise, like, I'm actually a super authentic, genuine guy with the most pure intentions. Because I think with an intro like that, it's like, oh gosh, what's this guy going to be talking about? And dude, it's such a privilege to be here because once again, I put everything through this lens of impact. And when we first connected, I was like, all right, this guy gets me. I wonder what cool things we can do together. So here we go.
Well, I'm very excited about this conversation. I was listening to a lot of your other content out there. And one of the things I want to start out first is you say on your website there, christuff.me, is you say your mission is simple: to put an end to this crisis of disconnection, to solve the problem of the great resignation and quiet quitting, all while increasing productivity and ROI by simply bringing humility and humanity back into business. During your life, during your journey, Chris, when did you come to that mission where that resonated with you and you started really unpacking that and you're like, this is what I'm on this earth for?
So it took hitting rock bottom to really find it. And for whatever reason, that seems to be a similar theme with a lot of leaders, where it isn't till you're at the lowest of lows that you reach inside yourself and see what is it that's really driving you. And so my rock bottom came in 2016, and a lot of people ask me, what was that like? I was having panic attacks. I was freaking out, right? And so I took a month off. I asked for a month off from my agency that I was a partner at the time. And I really looked inside myself. And in that moment, three massive things changed. And the first one was the fact that my metric of success was off. Because my metric of success up until age 36, when I hit that rock bottom, was beating my older brothers at the game of life. And most of that was judged monetarily or status. I'm like, I got to throw that out the window. And I changed my metric of success to impact on a daily basis. When my head hits the pillow, did I have that impact that I intended? The second thing that changed was that I committed to my wife and my two daughters, who were 6 and 4 at the time, my daughters, that I would always prioritize them. And that I would no longer prioritize the big work trips and the hobnobbing with the who's who over real authentic connection with them. And the third thing that changed was that my metric of impact is magnified through others. And it doesn't just have to be me. When I can help be that catalyst for others, it's magnified. You don't have to be the hero. So once again, I had an advertising agency that I was one of the partners in, and we had 400 employees. And if you look at the average kind of age, I mean, you're talking about 23 to 30-year-olds. And I put all of my time and effort into just being the mentor and leader that they craved. And it was 7 months after that as I dug myself out of the hole, right? And I started to implement a lot of these things with action that I introduced myself on an executive retreat, and I was around the fire. I'm like, I don't even know how to introduce myself because I'm not the digital and social guy, which was what my first currency, that thing that I was known for. And so I said on a whim, hey everyone, I'm Chris Tuff. I don't really know what I do. I've got 400 employees at my firm, and I'm kind of like the millennial whisperer. Then I went on and shared my story. I cried a little. I got super vulnerable. And I sat down by the fire, and these guys, average age being probably about 55, all of them entrepreneurs, they looked at me and they're like, man, tell me some of the stuff you do with these young people because I can't figure them out. Another guy was like, yeah, half of my employees are VP or above because it's the only way we can keep them is giving them some sort of VP title. And then it just was this tirade. And I immediately started to tell them some of the tactics I used at my fairly large firm. And it was 3 weeks later, a couple of those guys called me and they're like, dude, this stuff is working. Like, my people are coming in, they have smiles on their face, and you know what? It's kind of fun. Like, I actually feel like I'm connected with these people. And another friend of mine, his name's Tommy Breedlove, he was the one leading the retreat. He goes, Chris, you got to write that book. So I wrote it. And I would say the rest is history, right? But it took some time. And then the book got a lot of traction. And, I ended up being on the main stage at Nike, which was one of my dreams, and other things. And then the pandemic hit. And, one of the two traits that I'm trying to instill in my daughters are resilience and tenacity. And tenacity comes with following your passion, and resilience comes with building a muscle. And I have a rule for myself, because rules tend to be easier to obey than just trying to follow something on a whim. And if something doesn't go my way, it's my 20-minute rule. I can dwell in it for 20 minutes, then it's time to bounce back. And the biggest speech of my life, which was actually on the main stage with the president of Nike, with both of their sales teams there, I got the call from the assistant as the pandemic hit. It's like, Chris, this ain't happening. We don't know when it's going to happen. And I'm like, oh, crap. Like, this is all of that momentum is now gone. What do I do now? And so I was kind of bummed for 20 minutes. And I'm like, what's the book I was really meant to write? Like, what is it that most people go to me for advice for? Like, the people in all walks of life that they're like, Chris, how do you do this? And it's actually networking, right? People will always be like, Chris, how do you end up at these crazy places with these crazy people? And I had done a guest lecture at Vanderbilt, my alma mater, and it was the highest rated guest lecture of the year. And the title of that guest lecture for their senior class was How to Network Like a Mofo. I was like, that's it. And what if I could actually reverse this whole mentality that networking is all about reciprocity? Instead, we made it a call to action for people to save their asks and to instead approach no different than what I was espousing in my first book internally. It's authentic connection, taking a vested interest in your people. What if I just reverse that outward, right? That seems like a really cool book. And I don't really know how long this pandemic's going to last. So I'll just use it as a way to interview the untouchables during this pandemic. And so it took me, the Millennial Whisperer I wrote in about 4.5 months with an amazing team. My sister is an editor. And then I worked with Vanderbilt and all this, the 72 different data sets and all that stuff. And this one I took 2.5 years because I'm like, this is so much fun. I'm meeting some of the most interesting people that all have lessons to be taught to, whether you just graduated from college or you're a 55-year-old person that just feels stuck. How can we make that a lot more fulfilling and authentic along the way, but also more better conversions and better networks? And that's how Save Your Asks was born. And now it's interesting because I talk kind of, I do probably about one keynote a week to different organizations, and a lot of times they're like, yeah, we kind of want both, right? And the underlying principle is exactly, Christian, right? Kind of how we first met. What was that, like a week ago, 2 weeks ago? And it was authentic. It was genuine. And I didn't ask you for anything, right? I say you get one ask out of anyone in your network, and why waste that up front? And meanwhile, you look at what's happening, right? There are all of these sociological factors, especially with young people that are thrown into these sales systems, that they're automating their asks on LinkedIn, right? And that interpersonal muscle isn't as developed as it is for, I'm an Xer / millennial. I'm 42, almost 43, right? Like, so I had more of that muscle than what they had. And the reason for that is, you look at even our first flirtations, and I talk about this with why are these generations so different? Like our first flirtation, I had to pick up a phone. I had to get through mom and dad. Once I got through mom and dad, I then had a list of things I would talk to the person I'm trying to flirt with about. And, that was a muscle that was built. And you juxtapose that to anyone 36 and younger, they got a brand new iPhone with a Snapchat account, and it's all right here, right? And so it's like, how can we actually bridge all of these things while also offering a glimpse of more authentic connection and passions in people's lives. Like, how do we can weave those in? And now that kind of takes me to present day, where that is the name of the game. And you know, when you asked me to be on this pod, I'm like, absolutely, because I put it through that lens of both authentic connection, because we're going to walk away with an even greater bond from sharing this experience together. But then also the impact lens. Like, I want to offer immediate things to your listeners that they can leave and start implementing without having to hire me as a consultant or coach, right?
Well, what I find so interesting, you know, I was consuming a lot of your content, and the stream, that silver lining that connects everything that you do, you know, writing books, author, coach, you know, speaking, and, you know, the catalyst for a lot of people when they're getting to the different pivot points. We're going to be talking about here shortly, is that authenticity, that vulnerability. And I want to ask, because that is heavily used right now. And I want to ask you, Chris, how do you approach in different environments, different atmospheres? So, you know, when you're on the stage, your authenticity and vulnerability may be slightly different versus obviously if you're, you know, working in the environment of your home and your wife and your kids and so forth. So what does that look like, and how do you like to be authentic and vulnerable and have that discernment when to open up and when not to? What does that look like, Chris?
I mean, to me, authenticity is showing up as the same person in every conversation. And it's also getting to a place where you're treating humans as humans and not playing the status game. And you look at, I'm careful to not show some of the more glamorous, ridiculous things that I get exposed to on social media, because it just makes more people hate you, right? It's like, why is Chris with Drew Brees and Kelly Slater and, you know, Eddie Vedder at Surf Ranch? I'm not posting that stuff, right? Because all that makes people do is hate you. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, right? And that's also, there's a lot of negatives to what social media is doing to all of us with the comparison thing. So authenticity to me, Christian, is showing up as the same person in every conversation. But what I find is that people are lost, and they don't know themselves well enough, nor do they have a purpose driving them. And, you know, one of the tools in my toolbox that I'm actually not supposed to talk about, because I was just on air with a national radio show, and the head of this company said, Chris, our website just got shut down. We don't want we need large organizations. We don't want you. So I'm not going to call them out because I'm not allowed to anymore. But I use this tool that takes less than 15 minutes to fill out, and it shows who you are as a person, which is instilled in you age 13 and older, and then where you are in your job. And I can quickly analyze where that disparity lies. And it's an amazing thing. A lot of us fall into the industry that we're in because of a variety of reasons. Some of it's because we want to prove to mom and dad that we can do it. Or maybe your mom and dad were that specific profession, and that's why you got into it. Or it was convenience of your first job interview that you finally got the job, and then you rose in the ranks. And then 15 years later, you ask yourself, I don't even like this stuff anymore. And so that, to me, I think a lot of people get stuck, and then they live these largely inauthentic lives because their passions and dreams exist way outside of it. And, you know, and that's the biggest thing that I get from these executives when I'm off the stage or I'm done working with their team. They pull me inside and they say, so Chris, everything you talk about, I want. But I'm going to be honest with you. I have zero passions in my job. Like, I go to the golf course to do those. And I'm not the same person with my family as I am with my friends, as I am with my workers. I said, okay, great. So let's get started, right? Now it's the time. It's never too late. Like, and I've got great exercises for people that are in those pivotal moments. And so to me, that's the name of the game. And I don't talk to you any different than when I talk to some of these, like my tattoo artist, Kiyoki. Which, you know, we've spent 42 hours together of pain. And I talk to Kiyoki the exact same way that I would talk to you, or the guy that helped fix my chimney, or the guy that detailed my car. All of these are case studies of people that I've been able to at least light a spark under that's completely transformed their lives and how they look at it. Along with some of the more sexy stories of these more well-known people that I also, but I'm the same I'm doing the same thing. I'm talking in the same way. And the same is true with my daughters, right? Like, and I probably get a little bit more fired up when I bring down the hammer. Like, I'm not always super calm and collected, because sometimes kids need the hammer to come down. Like, they need rules. We all needed rules at certain points in our life. But it's also, one of the things that I struggle with, Christian, and I write about this quite a bit, is that at the end of the day, 20% of people are going to hate me, right? And I say 20% of all audiences still want to punch me in the face afterwards. And in certain audience, sometimes it's 80%. I can see they're stacked against me. They're like, who is this D-bag with the yellow glasses and the tattoos and swagger, right? Like, and he's got Jordan ones that match his jacket. Like, what is this? And then usually by the end of it, it's like, okay, wait, he really does just want to change people and have an impact. But there's always that outlier of, like, some people aren't going to get me. And as I've gone through the struggles of this entrepreneurial journey, one of the lessons I've been taught is stop trying to convert the non-believers and just focus on the believers. And that was such an important thing, because I would almost take it as a challenge when I see that person with their arms crossed in the frown. I'm like, I'm going to win that guy over. And when I don't, it's disheartening. And so I'm like, oh, screw that guy. Like, we got enough momentum that, like, let's go have the impact to the people that are really ripe for it.
So from what I'm hearing, and I love this approach, because this is something I've always struggled with. I did a TEDx talk, and it was like, being authentic means you're putting your heart out for everybody to see. And sometimes, yes, you show up, but also sometimes you get your heart stabbed. But the way you present it, I love that approach, is that it doesn't matter, because you're going to show up as Chris Tuff no matter what. And then you don't put any weight on who stabs your heart, because at the end of the day, you know what, they're struggling with their own thing. Is that the kind of the paradigm or the reframe that you
100%.
Okay.
100%. And, and it's, this, Christian, as a speaker, sometimes it's even hard to read people's disposition, because, you, like me, we're very passionate, and passion scares people. Authenticity scares people. And sometimes that, like, shell shock when I go on the stage can be misinterpreted as disinterested. And it was actually my speaking coach, Nick Morgan, who's one of the top speaking coaches out there. And it was he that taught me, the wrong way to start a speech is to, one, talk about an agenda, credentialize yourself, or make some sort of chit chat for relevance and connection. And he asked do you do those things? I was like, yeah, I do all three. He's like, well, those are the wrong ways. What you need to do, you need to drop them right into the action. So you're inverting Maslow's hierarchy of need. And you're basically 90% of that audience is predisposed to hate you. So it's in those first 5 minutes that you need to drop them into the action to capture the attention to then bring through the rest of the speech. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? So I actually choreograph my speeches in a way that you're like, what the heck is happening right now? And then you go into once again, more of those authentic stories that are backed by data, and then specific tactical takeaways that people can leave with. So, it's been super interesting to me. And there's been so many unexpected learnings along the way that, and I'm still learning. Like, I still don't have it all figured out, but I do know that it's working, right? Like, I've got enough of these amazing case studies under my belt from all walks of life that is really what I'm trying to inspire, is a little bit more of that, where passion, purpose, and profession can all overlap into this beautiful space where work doesn't feel like work, where you don't know whether or not you work 200 hours or 0 hours. And I see this world, and that for me is like that stake in the ground, and that vision is, one, my purpose statement, which has been to inspire and connect. And I've evolved that to be really to unlock as many dreams and passions in as many individuals as possible, and give them a route to pursue those in a thing that can make them money. But then it's also this place of really authentic connection driving that fuel on a day-to-day basis. And so anytime I'm interacting with someone, my only desired outcome is authentic connection. And I've got one ask in any one of these individuals. Am I really going to waste it now to ask them for a keynote at their organization? No. I'm going to get it to a point where an ask doesn't even feel like an ask. And that's when you know that a relationship is ripe for it, when asks don't feel like asks. And it's just more conversation. It's like, dude, I need to come in and help I just want to help your team. What do you think? Hell yeah, you should. And then you get into it, right? Like that didn't feel like an ask because you've got the relationship. And we live in a world right now where everything is get rich quick. It's instant everything. And we don't spend near enough time on the most important piece, which is the face-to-face connection. And, you look at these kids or kids on the Lamborghinis with the $100 bills. And the truth of the matter is it's not that easy. Crypto is not going to make you a millionaire overnight. It's actually a lot of hard work, and it's tenacity and resilience. That's the name of the game. But who's teaching that, right? No one. And so that's what I want to inspire more of.
It's unorthodox thinking, and we could talk a lot about that. But I want to ask you this, because I have had a lot of conversations on this podcast, offline, that it's like we hear the find your passion when you're 20, young 20. But what I've always found interesting is that there are pivot points in your life where it's like you got to find another passion, because maybe you had an exit, maybe in your business, maybe you've done very well, you climbed up the corporate ladder, whatever it may be, the circumstance, and then you're like, okay, I've got money, okay, check. Now what do I do? And there are some of our listeners that have had exits, and they have to kind of redevelop who they want to be, how they want to show up in the world. And that evolution, right? That second, I like what you mentioned earlier on, offline, that day two kind of mentality. Like what's the next stage of my life look like? And Chris, you're very good at unpacking that with the catalyst, finding that their dream, their ambition. But I'm talking about mainly that next tier, right? Someone that had an exit, they found their passion, they loved it, they grew it, and then they were like, okay, now what? What do I do? I'd love for you to just maybe share kind of some stories or case studies or situations.
This is my favorite.
Awesome. Go, Chris, go.
So it's one of two things. All right. And one is linear thinking and the none is nonlinear. Let me use the nonlinear example first. All right. And it's one of my favorite tangible examples in a space that you would never piece together three things. But I look at my superpower is not writing books or, articulating myself. My superpower is I'm an artist. I can look at someone and piece together dots that they can't piece together themselves. Right. And so I had a dental consultancy that I was a partner of. I knew nothing about dental. All right. But I learned it as I developed these masterminds with these amazing entrepreneurs. And actually, dentistry has the #1 suicide rate of any other profession, which I didn't realize. And so I worked with 15 to 25 dentists through a year-long period where we would interact on a weekly basis. And then we'd do these epic getaways to then do the awesome work where the magic happens, right? And so we were getting towards the end of the year. And we were out in Deer Valley. And one of these younger dentists, after our vision session, what he had said in the room was that his vision, his goal was to get to 5 million in revenue. His name's Bonner. He's from Austin and he's about 29 years old and he's crushing it, right? He's only 2 years practicing and crushing it. And that's what he said. And then I had the opportunity to ski with Bonner, and nothing catalyzes relationships like activities, right? And that's why I do a lot of my stuff, mountain biking or kiteboarding, like that's where bonds are made. And so he and I are just gunning down the hill and we're trying to get as many vertical feet as fast as possible, right? And it's on the chairlift up that he's stuck next to me. And I could tell he's kind of like, oh God, I'm going to be with Chris. He's probably going to be grilling me the whole time. And I was. And I was like, I want to revisit that vision because it's got to be bigger than that. And I told him my vision was more tangible in that, I have this picture in my head of me kiteboarding, coming back, my family's hanging out, I'm grabbing a call, I'm connecting people, I'm making business deals, it's this blurred line between all aspects of my life in this beautiful, amazing place, right? And so I was like, you need something bigger. And it was on the seventh write up. He finally turns to me. He goes, okay, Chris, fine. You want to know what I want? You want to know what I want? All right, here's what I want. I want to do keynotes just like you. I want to be a keynote speaker, all right? I kind of want to be a keynote speaker. And then ever since I was a kid, Chris, you know what else I want? Is I want to be a high school football coach. That's it. What are you going to do with that? All right, there it is. And don't make fun of me. And my eyes got wide. I think I exit, like people were looking at us from the chair left in front of us and behind us. I was like, Bonner, there it is. You just put the stake in the ground. All right, so here's what we're going to do. All that stuff we were talking about and I was teaching around culture, we're going to blur it all together. All right, and so in this group, I'm going to challenge you 6 months from today. You are going to present a keynote on how dentistry is exactly like football. The difference between offense, defense, the group huddle. Not only that, you're going to bring high school football into your dental practice. You live in Austin, all right? There's nothing more marketable than high school football. So for your team huddles, you're going to put blackout under your eyes. For your rewards and recognition, you're going to give away an MVP engravable trophy for that employee of the month. And lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to find you enough freedom in your life that 2 years from now, when your son is entering Pee Wee football, you have enough time to actually coach him. And he just looks at me with like tears in his eyes. He's like, oh my gosh. Okay, so that's the non-linear way, right? So we're blurring it all together. So many of us have been trained that you go to work and your passions live outside, right? And that's the way it was for boomers and Xers. And now we have pretty much two generations, at least a generation and a half with Gen Z and the younger millennials, that if we don't actually itch some of those passions, they're going to leave. And so how do we actually incorporate more of those in? And that's the non-linear approach, all right? The more linear approach is a good example of my friend Bert Weiss. And so Bert Weiss, he's in a small group with me. He has a big radio show called The Bert Show, and it's syndicated across the U.S., one of the top 5 morning radio show hosts in the U.S. And so he turned to me as we were going in 3.5 years ago to our forum group. There's 6 of us in this group. And he said, man, like the stuff that you're doing in the dentistry space and with your books, and like, it's amazing. And, you know, I just, Chris, like I'm crushing it ratings wise, but like, I just want a little bit of that in my life. And I turned to him, I said, Bert, if you look at your currency and all of our currency, it's that thing that you get paid to do. It's what everyone goes to you for advice around. You got to ask yourself if you're passionate about that. Are you passionate about being the most listenable person on earth? Because you talk for 4 hours and people listen to you. Are you passionate about that? If the answer is yes, which in this case it was like, okay, perfect. Right now, everyone and their dog is creating a podcast. Who's got more authority than you to teach those people around how to be more listenable? I'll help you write the book Listenable. And that's where it started. Fast forward 3.5 years later, he's finally published it in March, Listenable, which I'll send you a copy of. And we've actually together created a podcast consultancy for radio show hosts to evolve them into podcasting and digital and social. Because he's implementing all of this stuff. And he went from 5,000 downloads a day to $260,000 a day. And it's actually monetizing massively. So that's the more linear example of that. And so one of the things that I think is imperative that we all do is that we incubate these passions on the side. And that might be through nonprofits. It might be through hobbies. But we've got to be incubating these things on the side. Even if you take my own story arc, right? I was one of the first people in digital and social. I helped build a lot of the infrastructure with, the Zuckerbergs of the world, the Sheryl Sandbergs, right? Like, but then I looked at myself, I was like, I'm no longer passionate about that. What do I do next? And my incubation, I wrote a book called The Millennial Whisper that's all about connection and culture. And it was about 18 months after that my currency was displaced by, I became the culture guy. I was like, I don't want to just be the culture guy. I want to be the connection guy. And then I wrote the next book. And so I'm always deliberately incubating that next thing. And it might just be a fail, and I can garner enough momentum in my life that it actually sustains me through some of those low points, or it becomes my full-time gig. And so, Christian, and for listeners, you're probably, okay, what's a good exercise. My favorite exercise for anyone listening that you found yourself a little stuck or trying to figure out what's next is my Google Me exercise. And so if you treated yourself as a search engine, right? So for me, it would be the search bar of Chris Tuff. What is it that everyone's going to you for advice for that you're also excited to respond about? And so like for me, my inventory would look something along the lines of big green eggs and how to set them up and good recipes with them. It's being the father of young daughters and being a good role model for them. It's building businesses out of books and sustaining that impact on a broader level. It's how to learn how to kiteboard, right? From the where should they go? So what are all those things that you have? And so come up with 20 to 30 of those. And then after you have that, if I challenged you, pick one that if you were to create a podcast on that you have to record every single week for the next year, or write a book on, or do a documentary, which of those are you passionate enough that you have the tenacity to see it all the way through? Because here's the other issue, Christian, is that one of my greatest passions is kiteboarding. If I had taken that too literally, I could have started my own kiteboarding school down in the Caribbean, and then it would literally be 2 weeks later, and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, how did this happen? Right? I just turned my favorite hobby into a job that is exhausting, right? So you got to actually see it through because one of the things that's very both scary and I think in a lot of cases irresponsible is when you totally ditch your currency for a new one because you think you're passionate about it without it being tested. And that's why everyone should have a side hustle and a side passion, right? And so I've got a story there. So I had a friend and he called me, he goes, Chris, he was like one of the head of COOs for a massive consumer packaged good company in the US. And he called me and he said, Chris, so, you really inspired me to take action on some of these passions. And one of the things I've noticed is that I really enjoy helping people on their job journey. And so I know you know Sarah Blakely and Jesse Etzler. Can you get me an interview for this senior recruiting job at Spanx? And I turned to this gentleman and I said, dude, listen, first of all, that's irresponsible. Like you know how to get 747s from China to all of the targets to supply them, right? So, and you might not be that passionate about it, but it's irresponsible just as a person to ditch that overnight. So what I would encourage you to do is to get through the door at these organizations and then make lateral moves towards that place of passion while also side hustling that's more in line with this thing, right? Like, so don't ditch your currency too soon for what you think a passion of yours could be. And by the way, I'm not going to waste my ask with Sarah and Jesse for you to get an interview because you're underqualified for that or overqualified, however you interpret it. And so, I think you got to have that kind of balance. And until you do it, until you spend a year going after it, you're not really going to know whether or not that thing is a sustainable new currency for yourself. Does all that make sense?
It does, and it's so strategic as well because I love that approach where it's like it's just logical. It's like, hey, yes, you may be passionate. Let's go ahead and test that out for a little while. Have that side hustle. Keep doing that. Very active with it. But don't put all your eggs in that basket. Be very strategic with it. I want to ask, with regards to kind of save your ask, because I was listening to one of your podcasts prior, and you said on that where you kind of swung on the pendulum, where you were like way over here, like you were asking directly, and then you were over here where you're like so much value, and you never really got around to asking anything. And so I'd love to talk about that because it is like a science and an art a little bit, where there is that relationship, but then you want to be like very articulate with when you do ask, how you ask, the approach behind it, etc. So I'd love to unpack that a little bit in regards to how you kind of walk through it and how you make sure that you find that silver lining.
So here's the unfortunate news. Most people are assholes, and that's not their fault. And once you're attuned to the assholes, and those are people that are going in for ask after ask, and it sounds something like this. Hey, Chris, can you get me tickets to the Hawks game this weekend? And then a month later, without ever having checked in with how I am or how my family is, they're like, hey, Chris, I need an intro to your friend that runs blank, right? Like, I'm like, dude, sorry, man. you're an asshole. So, you got to help those people. So, because once you're attuned to it, you're going to start seeing it happening all around you. So, one is just raising your awareness. And then you got to ask yourself, am I one of those assholes? And the best way to find out whether or not you're an asshole is ask your friends. Be like, hey, so this guy, Chris, was just telling me about assholes. Do you think I'm an asshole? Like, I now noticed that I've gone in for like 3 asks with you, and I apologize. Like, hopefully I don't come across as that. And so, one is getting rid of the assholes in your network because they're going to do nothing for you. And then 2 is asking yourself if you're that. And when you look at yourself, the ask continuum is, if asks come really easy for you, you're probably a pretty good salesperson, but you're also most likely an asshole. So how can you move closer to that middle ground of this authentic connection? But, I say that I'm a recovering asshole that went too far to the other side, where I would be in that situation, Christian, where I was going in. It was perfect opportunity for me to go in for the sell. And then I just felt bad because I'm like, no, I'm going to keep building this relationship. And so sometimes you can wait too long that you let the ask pass you by. And for anyone, especially for recovering assholes or those that are on the other side of that ask continuum, my favorite tactic to practice is what I call masking your ask in your dream. That dream needs to actually be genuine and authentic to what it is that you're doing. But I mean, even as I deliberately kind of networked my way through a book about networking, I would end all of my calls with this tactic. And, I talked to a lot of those untouchables, right, that are impossible to get meetings with. And in one case, it was this guy who flies under the radar. His name's Jason. And he had been massively successful in the veterinary space. And he was introduced to me as a guy that rents out Kelly Slater's Surf Ranch every week. I'm like, hell yeah, dude. I want to, every year. And I was like, I want to meet this guy. And so we totally hit it off. And I ended my call with him. I said, now listen, I want to interview some other awesome people that can be impactful to what I'm trying to produce here. And I'm going to practice my favorite tactic. And as a, multi-billionaire, like, you probably get assholes all around you. So I'm very wary of that, but here it is. He goes, bring it on, Chris. I go, all right, it is my dream to create a handbook, whether you just graduated from college or you're just like a 55-year-old person just feels stuck. I want to make you a lot more effective at your ability to network and sell, but also to make it a lot more fulfilling along the way. Who in all of your network, Jason, do I have to interview for this book? And he did not hesitate at all. And he said, Chris, you gotta interview Raymana. Do you know who Raymana is? And I follow surfing and I knew of Raymana's name, but I'm like, no, tell me about him. Well, he goes, Chris, Raymana is like the king of Tahiti. And he is one of the most famous surfers in the world, not for necessarily the crazy waves that he's caught, which he's done, but he is the guy at Kelly Slater Surf Ranch that can get anyone up on the most epic wave of your life. And it was 6 minutes into our relationship, Chris, that Raymana, I was there. I was so nervous because it's this man-made wave and it's perfect. You don't want to botch it. Everyone's watching you. And Raymana just came by right next to me in the pool as I was about to catch the wave. And he put his hand on my heart and he looked into my eyes and he said, I love you, brother. Just breathe. Just breathe. And he said, Chris, in that moment, a connection was made for life. I then went on to catch the most epic wave. I got barreled and I ended up hugging Raymana afterwards. And now 8 years later, we text almost every single week. And this guy, he splits his time between Surf Ranch in California and Tahiti. He is the greatest connector of billionaires and A-list celebrities. And he's this 46-year-old, 270-pound Tahitian dude that can get anyone up on the wave. Do you want to interview him? I was like, hell yeah, I want to interview him. It was the height of the pandemic. The next day I get a FaceTime and it said French Polynesia on it. I yell over, I'm like, Julie, I think it's Raymana. Raymana hops on FaceTime and it's exactly, he's you can tell he just got out of the water. It's like the tiki hut in the background. He's like, brother man, a friend of Jason's is a friend of mine. What do you want to talk about? I was like, all right, dude, I was watching some of the videos of you. First of all, your life is insane. Second of all, I want to hear about this bond you have with Jason because he talks about this moment in the wave pool where you put your hand on his heart and you said, "I love you, brother. Just breathe." Tell me about that. He goes, "Yes, yes, yes, yes. Now don't tell Jason this, but I tell that to everyone when I'm teaching them how to surf Kelly's wave. And I mean two things by it. One, I want you to take in this moment. Forget about your big job. Like, this is going to be an epic wave. Two, this is like a $10,000 wave that you might miss. And so I don't want you to walk away all bummed, and I want you to have a smile on your face." And that's what I do. I was like, "Raymana, oh my gosh," right? And I actually use now that story in Raymana as the backbone for, here you have this guy that is connecting so authentically with the most untouchables, using his currency of surfing. And once again, this authentic connection where, like, and, you know, so fast forward, Jason and I have become super close friends. I've now been to Surf Ranch twice. Raymana was there both times. We are super close, and we FaceTime all the time as well. And it's like, you see this thing, right? And you're with him. He's getting like texts from Jeff Bezos, and actually, it was one of Cindy Crawford calls Raymana the blue pill because he can get anyone up. And so I'm like, here you have this guy, right? And he's so authentic, he's so real, and that currency, he gets people to experience this thing that, you know, for me was very spiritual. It was actually after my experience with Raymana and this guy, Grant Corrigan, who's this now a friend of mine who Jason introduced me to. He was in a snowmobile accident and he's paralyzed from the waist down. And he did this crazy thing as he was recovering from that. He pushed himself across all of the South Pole. And so Jason invited me out to Surf Ranch. It was a fundraiser for Grant's foundation because now Grant is the only paraplegic with his pilot's license. And he now takes Army veterans and first responders that have had life-altering injuries, and he takes them up in a plane and hands them the throttle of the plane with a curated playlist to trigger a moment to change their outlook on life. And it was through Raymana and then this connection I had with Grant and then just this crazy experience that I came back and I turned to my wife. I'm like, I'm going to quit my job that I've been at for 15 years and I'm going to go all in on this. What more of a sign do I need? You know, and because it's time to ditch that old currency. I'm done with the agency world. It's now time to change the world. And Julie said, like, do it. And I say all of that, Christian, because when you take action on these things, right, it's beautiful things happen all around us. And I know it sounds cheesy or unattainable, but once again, and it's not just the super, you know, ridiculous, sexy stories. It's in my daily interactions when my daughters won't even go to Publix with me anymore because they're like, "Dad, you're going to get caught in like some deep conversation with some random person that you meet there." Because if I feel the energy, I go there. It's not a status thing. It's not with the intent. I want to be a catalyst for as many people as possible. So anyways, that's my quick tirade on that.
No, and I appreciate you just diving into that because I love the way you got amazing energy and I can tell your passion. I love the way you obviously impact other people and driving their catalyst and getting clarity for themselves because there's so many individuals that are listening that even myself, when I had an exit, I was like, what do I do now? Where do I go? And having that conversation with ourselves, but also having someone like yourself that's able to bring all this. And I love what you mentioned, blurring this together to get a very clear picture and say, how are we going to bring all my passions together? Chris, I was thinking about this the other day before our podcast, and I was just wondering what your thoughts on this. I believe everybody has greatness in them, but a lot of them we don't unlock that, and I'm curious why sometimes, right? Whether it's we strive for greatness, but then we just are embrace mediocrity, we embrace good. What are your thoughts on that, Chris? I'm just curious because I think it's so interesting in regards to culturally what's going on.
Everyone has greatness in them. There's no doubt. But to unlock that greatness, it takes a lot of guts, right? And being right at that precipice of taking that leap, it's super scary, both financially as well as just psychologically. Like to stand for something that isn't going with the flow is tough. And so I think that's one of the biggest issues. But, you know, even without necessarily taking the full leap, one of the big issues lies in the fact that a lot of us end up doing what we're doing out of chance or not design. And the most important thing that we can all do is invest in ourselves. And when I say invest in ourselves, it's really understanding our core being, understanding our purpose, doing some of that thinking, doing some of that journaling, but then also using tools like Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, and Culture Index being another one, which I'm not supposed to be calling out. The Culture Index is what I find to be most impactful. I've already broken all the rules, so I'll continue to break it. But when we're able to understand as an individual where our strengths and talents live, and then we pack that purpose and passion on top of it, all of us become unstoppable. And I saw it in dentistry, right? And it was a tale of two dentists where either they were a entrepreneur / practicing partner dentist that they were born to be like me. They're rainmakers like me. And they're stuck in a chair fixing teeth all day. And so the name of the game for those people was spending the year to get them out of the chair. Hire the dentist that can come in and get you out of the chair to allow you to spread your wings and fly in dentistry. Don't leave dentistry. Like, go get into real estate. Get people fired up. Bring that, what I call HAE, high-ass energy, to your teams. Go do those things, right? And then the other tale was the opposite of that, is they're craftsmen, right? They're introverts, high detail-oriented people. They got into dentistry because they love teeth and working on them. They're these perfectionists. And the tale for them is stop trying to be the entrepreneur, right? Stop trying to be the inspirational leader that I talk so much about. And instead, outsource that and hire for it and delegate accordingly so you can just work in teeth all day, every day. And so that's a kind of long-winded example of so many of us end up doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons. And now I actually have this, I meet these executives and they'll even tell me at very large, or then some of these people are pretty well known, and I'll force them to sit next to me. And in some cases it's on a plane and they can't escape. And, they'll take the culture index and then I'll look at it. I'll be able to quickly identify where that disparity is. And it's astonishing. And I have two cases of massive companies, big executives. And I'll look at them and say, you are absolutely miserable. Have you told your wife about this? And they're like, and then they'll be like, how can you tell that? And I take them through it. I tell them where it is. And then that's where they get teary-eyed and they're like, yeah, man, I haven't told anyone. But like, I'm making so much money. I've now, I've upgraded my lifestyle. I can't leave this. And I was like, okay, well, there's a way to do it responsibly. Let me help you. And that's where the magic happens, right? It's unlocking those things that live within each of us. And, Christian, the other thing I get a lot is like, well, Chris, yeah, what if like you're passionate about something you suck at? You absolutely suck at it. Well, my story for that, I went to school in London to figure out why I had a British father that didn't really like to hug, right? I'm like, I'm going to go to London for a semester, for my semester abroad from Vanderbilt, and I'm going to figure that out. I figured it out really quickly. I'm like, now I get why my dad is this way. But I only had I went through NYU program because Vanderbilt didn't have a program in London, and I only had 3 friends there. It was kind of lonely, but it was transformative in that I had to create these new friends, and I relied on these 2 a lot. And what was interesting there is that one of these 2 friends, their kind of massive passion was magic. And his name's Micah Lasher. And Micah was the most amazing magician I've ever seen. It was the only time in these bars and clubs that we would be able to attract girls because he would do these crazy magic tricks. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Micah, like, please. We'd always have to feed him at least 3 beers because when he started doing magic, it would just bring crowds to us. And then, he started to find that momentum with that. And then the other guy in our group, he was super passionate about comedy. And, he was saying that he really loved it and blah, blah, blah. And he was the least funny person, Christian, I've ever met. He had 0 talent in being funny. But we're like, screw it. We're in London. Like, you got no better place to be for these open mic nights. Like, let's at least go do 2 of them. Challenge yourself. Practice it, right? And for both of those open night mic nights, it was exactly what you would think out of a movie, like underneath one of these pubs, super smoky, 7 Brits in there. And both times, I think legitimately people threw stuff at him. And so it was 3 years after this experience, we all went on our way, that same person called me and they said, "Hey, Chris, I'm coming to Atlanta, actually Athens, and I'm playing at the Georgia Theater." I was like, "You're a magician now?" Because we had some touch points. He was playing, we were in the same space. He was doing some Google AdWords and stuff like that for a couple companies. He's like, "No, dude, I'm still doing comedy." I was like, "What?" How? Like, he goes, "Every single day since we left London, I've practiced. And you know what, Chris, I'm actually pretty funny. And I'm headlining this thing up at the Georgia Theater." I was like, "Well, dude, I'm going to come up and see you." And you know what? He was hilarious. And that was Aziz Ansari. And Aziz was my roommate at the time. And I saw his first couple shows. And then obviously he went on to create Parks and Recreation, host the MTV Music Awards, and, be who he is today. But there are examples all around us, right? Of people that with enough passion comes that tenacity, and the 10,000 rule is real. And so why are we not looking at that and then also delegating accordingly to create a life where we can potentially pursue these things full time in a responsible manner? And that's what I'm trying to catalyze more of.
Well said, man. Man, that is so exciting. And you're just on a just a massive, beautiful path to see how many people you can impact at a high level. Chris, I really appreciate you being on here, man, and just unpacking your journey, your story, your mission, but also the energy that you have to impact so many people. And then as well as just understanding, saving your ask and, kind of understanding the reframe and the way to be authentic and vulnerable, regardless of the environment. You show up, you're integrous who you are, regardless. For those that want to reach out, want to grab those books, as well as just maybe just follow you and be part of your ecosystem, Chris, how do they do that?
Yeah, sure. The best way to look at my stuff, and every week and a half, I write a blog post on my Substack. So that's christuff.me, CHRISTUFF.me. And then the best place to get in touch with me is actually probably on Instagram, and that's Tuff22, TUFF22, or on LinkedIn, and that's /Christopher Tuff. So I'm super quick at responding most of the time, and any questions. I mean, once again, I want to be a catalyst for others, right? So if I can be a catalyst for you, let me know, and check it out. I think you'll dig it.
Awesome, guys. And those links will be in the description below, so make sure you stop what you're doing. His LinkedIn, his website, his Instagram, everything, so you can be part of his ecosystem. And then if you are looking for a catalyst, I would highly recommend. He's got a huge ecosystem, but also he can really help you get clarity in your own life, wherever you're at in that pivot point in your life. Chris, I appreciate you being on here big time. That is my friend, best-selling author and highly sought-after speaker, my friend Chris Tuff. Guys, that is Journey with Christian Davis podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can. Boom, my man. That was